My guest for the evening does not believe beauty can save painting and sees institutional schooling as highly harmful to culture. He paints alongside his father at the Nerdrum Studio, continuing the Renaissance workshop tradition. Öde Nerdrum, welcome to the cave of Apelles.
Thank you very much.
So tonight I wanted to talk to you about what signifies how figurative painting is taught at the Nerdrum Studio and how that differs from the regular schooling when it comes to figurative painting. We'll talk about the importance of painting self-portraits, and also I want to hear your thoughts about what's lacking generally in classical figurative painting today, and of course what can be done for the stature, the status of figurative painting.
Yeah.
But tell us first, what is a normal day at the Nerdrum Studio?
Well, actually, it has become more and more normalized after the years.
Okay.
So we actually have a sort of a schedule finally after 30 years, and it begins with coffee in the studio of my father at 11, where we have an hour of discussion. We try to encourage. That's the word I'm looking for. We try to encourage the students to talk about painting. So that's why we have this hour. But usually it's odd talking from 11 to 12.
Okay.
Yeah. And the rest of the day is painting.
Right.
Yes.
How does it work then? I mean, for example, when I do courses, of course, people pay me and I teach. I'm really a teacher. But this is not how it works at the Nerdrum Studio.
No. It's there's no monetary payment.
Right.
So as you know, but some people have come there and said, "Is it really free?" And we try to tell them instantly, "No, it's not free. You have to stretch canvases for Mr. Nerdrum. You have to prepare his fan canvases. You have to do other housework, house-related work."
Yeah, modeling.
Yeah, modeling, of course. Yeah, so it's not free, but it's you pay with the resources that you have as a painter.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. It's what I've been thinking about too, being there for some years, that you could potentially go there and not learn too much if you do not invest your energy into it.
It's it's a highly it's like the old university standard. There's so much freedom that if you choose not to learn anything, it's a waste.
Right.
So.
Okay. And what is your position there? I mean.
Well, I'm with my mother. I go through the applications.
Right.
So we take the first draft before Odd chooses the final ones, so that he doesn't have to look through all the lost causes. No, I'm joking. It's not the lost cause, but those who are not ready, we tell them you're not ready.
Right.
And we send them to you,
right,
or to Sebastian, Salvo, or it depends on where they are in the world.
Right.
Yeah.
And you paint yourself.
Yes.
What?
Oh, you want me to say something about it?
Yes, please.
Yes, it was. I'm not a child prodigy or anything. I think I was 18 when I first took up a brush, and that was not because of any artsy cliche that I feel that I have to do to express myself, or I've drawn as far as I can remember. I hate that line. It comes in every application. No, but I just thought quite rationally that it would be quite stupid if none of the children of Mr. Nerdrum learn how to paint from him. So that's why I did it.
Right.
Yes.
So, and then we're talking about making a self-portrait.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one thing that is really important at the Nerdrum Studio. And what is the advantage of doing that?
Well, I think that, as others said often, that the one who has made the most self-portraits in history is probably Leonardo da Vinci. And I think the reason why he did it, and the major thing you can get out of it, is that when you draw or paint people faces, you tend to make mistakes, primarily proportionally, and those mistakes are derived from your own face.
Right.
If you have a long nose, you will make other people's noses longer. If you have a, etc. So making self-portraits, you have to fix those things, because it will be so clear. And by learning to fix your own face, you will learn how to fix everything.
Right. I believe he also talks about people who have short fingers need to draw people who have long fingers to correct their own mistakes.
Yes, that too. Yeah,
of the bodies.
It's opposite logic, but it's the same.
Yeah. Right.
Well, but my father has also often encouraged students to try to paint like the painter they look like in their face. So there was one student here that looked a little bit like El Greco, and he was struggling, and then Odd said, just paint like El Greco. You look like him anyways, right? And it worked. It's not like, we're not going to seek any originality, because why would you do that? But you have to, it's smart to be aware of who you are, and your mistakes, or how should I say, to be aware of your originality, to use that word.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that reminds me of, I guess we'll talk more about that, but it reminds me of something a Norwegian folk musician said about originality, defining it as the mistakes you make as you imitate your master.
Yes.
And I think that puts it where it belongs.
What it is. That's what it is. It's the mistakes you do.
Yeah. And of course, and this is also what I see in, when I teach courses, people normally say, oh, isn't it exciting that there's so many different expressions here, or portraits. Like typically I would use more sort of work of your father's, reproductions obviously, from the 80s, where it was more clear, more sculptural, you might say. And if I give all the students that same task, everybody shall paint this portrait. Afterwards they will say, oh, isn't it wonderful that there are so many different paintings here? And I always tell them, no, they should all be the same. Because if you manage to do it exactly the same, you will be exactly as good. Yeah. Yes.
Well, actually, I wouldn't agree so far, because a copy will never be better than the original. It can be almost the same, but it cannot improve it. That's why imitare is to be preferred. Imitation. Then you can improve.
Imitate the living model and not...
Yeah, but about the originality, I can understand that some people get caught up with Rembrandt, for example, and say, oh, I love those things about Rembrandt that make him Rembrandt. I can understand that, because it's like when you fall in love, you start to like their something about them that is unique to them, which is a problem. Or there was a girl once who said to me that she said, I don't know if it's true, but she said that when a girl starts to like a man, she would very much like to see him do disgusting things, like taking his finger up his nose or something like that. It's the best thing. and again, I can understand that you love something, or that you get a sort of affection for something that is uniquely to Rembrandt. But before that, you have to do it. You have to be a very good painter. So I'm not going to deny that aspect of it. But that point where you find Rembrandt as a person attractive, that can only come after you've first become a very good impersonal painter.
Right, and then of course you're talking about that late rough manner of painting. I mean, I've seen, and if you don't know the basics before you go there, you might easily just go off the cliff.
Yes.
I remember vividly one early student when your father really started to be really conscious about Titian. Not that he wasn't before, but really conscious about it. This younger man said that, well, this means that I have 30 years advantage on you, because I've discovered him at a younger age.
Yes.
So he thought he could just skip the line. And when it comes to Rembrandt also, painters that when they don't know the basics, they see what is typical to Rembrandt, and they think that those are the anatomical errors, for example. I mean, if you look at the late Prodigal Son,
Yes.
that person standing there is completely insane when it comes to the anatomy. But I mean, that's not what you should copy, right?
No. It's the same. It's the greatness of a painting that makes it great. It's not its faults.
Right.
But to turn it back in, it's not the faults either, which make it great. So one must be very careful of that. And people who have painted for a short time, there's thousands of things they don't see. They just have a feeling that this is very good, but they don't understand all of it. Why it's so good. It's like one of my friends who was sculpting down in Carrara. He was sculpting a butt of a woman, and he didn't understand what is it. I can't get the butt round enough. He made it rounder and rounder. And then the teacher, who's Arne Mæland, he's a sculptor in Bergen. He said to him, "Well, you have to let it go in here, over the butt." And then he did that, and then suddenly it looks round. So he had the feeling that something was wrong. He felt that something is wrong here because it doesn't look round enough, but he didn't know the answer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay, so we're talking about making a self-portrait, and I mean, obviously, practical reasons. That's the model you have right in front of you, free model. But I'm thinking also something that I think your father talked about when I was a student: the necessity or the advantage of using yourself as a model in different roles. So you can use the self-portrait to test out different characters and different psychologies, I guess.
Yes, that's very important, because otherwise you get a dozen of very serious self-portraits.
Yeah.
like that. That's people have a tendency to become very serious when they make self-portraits, and actually quite grumpy. So to put yourself in roles is very important.
Right.
To make it less personal. If you dig into yourself, you find just travesty. So to put yourself in role is, and it can help you to become a storyteller in painting too. To do that.
Right. So also then, when it comes to the actual everyday situation at the Nerdrum Studio, the students then would be painting themselves on their own work, just choose whatever they would like to do themselves.
Yes, well, we have actually started giving them tasks to start with a self-portrait.
Okay.
And then as a second task, make a narrative painting.
Right.
Yeah, but apart from that, they can choose whatever, how the narrative painting is done. And, but we started with that because we believe that that is something that we can offer them that other places can't. Since odds production is all about narrative painting. Yeah. And I mean, in many of these other schools, they graduate and they are told by the teachers, because they've learned to make forms and light and shape and all of that. And then the teachers say, now go out and make whatever you want to make. Right. It's almost like that. Right. And that's so irresponsible. You're teaching them to paint and you just let them go out. It's like a bird mother throwing the bird kids down on the ground. They have no idea what they're going to do, and then they are very easily taken over by the art virus. Yeah, and one thing that for sure is that when you're at the Nerdrum Studio, you're basically in a real work situation. It's not school, lessons in this or lessons in that. It goes all day long, right? Yes, it's something in between. It's more an environment. And I mean, Odd started with this when he was 18 years old. He got his first student when he was 18 years old. And it's not like many people have this view that you either make it as a painter or you have to become a teacher. But actually, Odd becoming a teacher is helpful for him. Yeah. Because he always has to be looked up to by the student. He has to hold a certain standard. He has to be better. Yes. So it's not only a service to the students. Yeah. And I mean, I forgot to mention, we occasionally, maybe 4 times a week, have drawing evenings, 1 hour, and then we compete. Yeah. odd together with the students.
Right. So there's no.
Yeah.
I mean,
There's no professor sitting inside a room where we can't see him and where we.
Yeah.
He's there and he's competing with us. So.
Yeah, and so that's an interesting point. The importance of comparing.
Yeah. When you've sat there and drawn for an hour, and perhaps one day I'm very happy with my drawing, it looks really good.
Yeah.
And then suddenly when I place it next to odds, it's not good anymore.
I remember he said, he recounted the story about a Swedish student, and your father said to him that well, you can try something like in the words of you can train a little bit more now and you will be even better than Zorn, but you have to remember all those that come after you.
Yes.
that you will never see. So you have to really compete not just with what is behind you, but also with what is coming that you don't know.
Yes, I think that's a joke from our father's side.
Well, yeah, no, but it illustrates the whole spatial thinking, right? That you're not. I mean, that's what I see often as a problem. That even for a lot of figurative painters, the classics is 19th century.
Yeah.
That's sort of where they stop.
Yeah.
But I've never experienced your father in that way. That you stick to that and that's it.
Yes, well, there's a general conception that before the Enlightenment period, people were just stupid.
Yeah.
That's widespread. It's not just in culture, but it's actually in culture it's a little bit better because they talk about Rembrandt and Velasquez, but for example, in terms of painting technique, they will not go further back than the 19th century.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think also your father has this ability to, which is connected with that, of seeing quality in quite surprising places.
Yes.
I mean, he introduced me, for example, to Bonnard.
Yeah.
Pierre Bonnard, the French painter, and you would immediately think, oh, well, he's a sort of a semi-pseudo modernist or whatever. But that was interesting. I saw an exhibition with him together with Matisse, and Bonnard was immediately an old master.
Yeah. No, but he's very humble. My father, when he views works, and because many people think that visual literacy is a language that you learn within months. Like, right now I know that Da Vinci is one of the best, and that Munch and Bonnard and Gauguin, they are not as good as the old masters, and it's a slave mentality.
Right.
You learn that this painter is better than this painter. And people actually think like this. And it was a very funny comment actually by the Norwegian chess player Magnus Carlsen. He was asked, who is the greatest chess player in your opinion of all time? And he said, and this is my father's standpoint too, that there's no greatest player. They're just the greatest games.
Right.
Or greatest moments or.
Right.
And then he said, so if I were to pick out the greatest player at a certain moment, it would have to be me 3 years ago, he said. And yes, it's the same here. So maybe Bonnard is not on the same level as Rembrandt in terms of quantity of work, but he has some work which is better than some of Rembrandt's work, some of his early works. And there is some freshman to Gauguin, which Ribera will never be close to.
Right. Right.
So yes, it's an extreme humble relationship to painting that you can learn from many surprising places.
I think the first time I came to visit your father at the studio, he was talking about the white hermaphrodite, and he was talking about that he had solved the composition the night before. The man peeking. Looking at the hermaphrodite in the corner there, and I remember he was talking about the 4 years he had spent on that painting, And that's quite different from speaking of seeing the 19th century as the olden days. And I know a lot of painters have very much respect for this quick way of painting, Sargent style. So these are quite different attitudes to painting.
Yes, they view it as gymnastics. So
yeah.
Not like.
Well, it reminds me of that. Who was that Greek painter? You don't have the paintings, so I always mix the names. I think it was Nicomachus.
Nicomachus was the quick one, yes.
The Aristotle's son, right?
Yes. Well, someone believes it that he was.
Well, anyways, he brags about having painted work really quick, and I guess it was Zeuxis or so who said, "Yeah, I can see that."
Yes.
So. And I guess this has been.
And there's another story which is flattering in his favor, that he was visiting, or he was going to paint this king, and he was just relaxing and drinking all the days. And I mean, the deadline was coming to an end, and the king said, "I'm going to kill you if you don't finish the painting." And then don't worry. And then like 2 days before he started painting, and the king was very happy with it. But I think it just shows you that the kings haven't the developed vision. A colleague has.
Right.
So.
Okay. So speaking of, well, we're talking about then this expression, "kill your darlings."
Yeah.
That whatever is necessary to give a story to the painting is what you'll do.
Yes, and I mean it's like a chess game, because my father has a very clear idea about how the painting is going to be done.
Yeah.
But then he ends up changing it.
Right.
Right, and it's like a chess game. You have to have a very clear tactic.
Yeah.
And suddenly you have to break that tactic and make a new one. And so it's and then you can say, "Oh my God, why did I bother to make such a plan in the beginning?" But you can't break that either. So it's like Caravaggio did the same with the Matthew martyrdom in Rome. I mean, you see the X-rays, and you have the accusations that he used to photograph.
Well,
and then you see the X-ray where it's a completely different composition, and he's used like months on it in total.
Yeah. I mean, you don't use a photo or camera obscura and then just move figures around. Then you've decided it beforehand. I'm also thinking about this photo I saw of your father in front of 2 men guiding 1 man. This was, could it be 94 or something? Anyways, these people are standing, one on this side and one on this side, sort of pressuring the guy in the middle, so who has to take a decision or whatever. But in the photo, the one on either side, they're pointing out. So, go this way or go this way. So the energy is going out of the painting. And then your father has then taken the arms in like that, so the guy in the middle is really pressured in between those two.
Yes, and very few painters have this mentality.
Yeah.
Even students by odds, they come and they are making a composition. They can make a composition, and they have a small drawing, and they've rooted it up or made a grid. Then they put it up, and then when I propose them to change some, take away a figure, they what?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I have planned this. Look at the drawing.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it's really strange because most of them, we're not talking about commissions. It's not like they have a deadline, or that they're the person commissioning you, who doesn't exist, wants the painting in a certain way, but they are actually making a deadline on themselves. In a way, and they are saying to themselves, "No, this is not going to be that much work."
And then I guess we're talking about something that I guess I mentioned that to Per Lundgren. The problem is not that you have a recipe or a progression, certain progression in how you work, but if you don't mix that with empirical studies of reality, and if you're not prepared then to change things to better the composition, then that becomes a problem. That you just follow a recipe and from A to Z. And
we have many examples of this in painting history, of a decadent periods of painting, which is where they fall into a style.
Right.
And they don't use their eyes anymore, and they don't have this relationship to painting that it must be improved.
Right.
You have the time between Michelangelo and Caravaggio.
Right.
Was such a time. Of course, Caravaggio comes and says that you have to use your eyes. You can't just copy another painter.
I mean, they criticize him for having to use models.
Yes. Yeah, so quite bad times. You could say that he saved painting almost.
Right.
And of course, you have a later period of time from in the 19th century in France, for example, the Saloon, which was a very decadent time as well. Right. Can you name me one painter from that period in the Saloon in Paris?
Not off the top of my head, but I mean, of course, you have these famous names, and a lot of them from Eastern Europe also.
But which ones are you thinking about?
Well, Piloty.
What?
Piloty. You know Piloty?
No.
And whom else? Well, I should know.
Well, okay, but anyways, this is actually a place where art history has got it right in a way. Where they celebrate the Impressionists, because at least the Impressionists started to paint directly from life again.
Right.
And more, at least. There was a freshness, which, because all these, I mean, the Greeks would have hated the Greek painting of the saloons in Paris, where they celebrate Zeus and Aphrodite in very symbolic, dry, representative ways.
Right.
They would have hated it.
So this is well, if you talk about this academic painting, then this is an example of where you follow a recipe, but the result is not a success. Because there is a certain progress that you learn at the Nerdrum Studio. I mean, it's not like completely arbitrary.
Well, actually, it's not a recipe like that. We all have a standard of what we want.
Yeah.
But getting there is not it's not a direct recipe.
We're not talking about first year you only draw. Then
no, not like that. No.
You go right into it.
Yes, yes, but you can fall into a style, and that is very dangerous.
Right.
And this sounds very artistic. But it actually isn't, because art itself has become a style after a time.
Yeah, well, that's what art is, right?
Yes.
When you paint shall be paint on canvas, it's removed from the empirical study of reality.
Yeah.
And that's a style.
Yes, and also a style is I mean, if you're concerned with style, then the storytelling has gotten into the background, and that is what keeps the painting up. You know, way too many painters today, classical figurative painters, they paint for other painters.
Right.
And that's a huge mistake, because why would you do that? Just paint for other painters. So actually some of those painters could actually become better painters by thinking more about sale. Yeah. Because then they think about non-painters too.
Yeah.
And what makes painting valuable for non-painters is the storytelling.
Right.
You can't persuade ordinary people. You have to start to like the painting technique. Look at this brush strokes here. You can't do that.
And when I think about then how your father teaches or does not teach, very often it's. I mean, this is my impression. Correct me if I'm wrong. That in a lot of other institutional schools, but also from different ateliers perhaps, there's an extreme focus on technique alone, more or less.
Yes.
When I think of your father, it's not so much technical questions as there's invitation for the students to come in and judge what he's doing. What could be? How can this?
Yes. I even have a story from a friend who was just visiting. I mean, he's not a student, and then suddenly Odd asks him. They've rarely met before. Yeah. What do you think can be improved there? And he gets such a shock.
Yeah.
Shouldn't he know that himself? Why is he asking me? I know nothing about painting, and Yes. Is to because, and that is Sebastian Salvo, who has also been here on this show, is also very clever to do that, because they understand that, of course, they see more than non-painters, but they can become blind by looking at the work, and then a person who's a non-painter can actually see something.
Okay, so in the introduction I talked about how the Nerdrum Studio is continuing the Renaissance workshop tradition. What are the similarities then between how painting was taught in the Renaissance and how it is taught at the Nerdrum Studio?
Well, it's very similar. Painting, you can say it hasn't been. When was the first painting school made? That was. It was probably the 18th century in Germany somewhere. But for a long time, painting was purely, it was like being a blacksmith, more or less. Just a little bit more divine, as in the Renaissance. So no schooling, you would be put under a master. And for example, Verrocchio and Leonardo would paint together with the other students in Verrocchio's painting. And that was the time when Verrocchio famously quit painting, because of Leonardo's Angel. And that is so what my father is doing with the Nerdrum Studio is that he's continuing painting as a trade, in the disguise of a trade. I mean, the market is not like that today.
No.
But still he
well, it prepares you for the actual situation after
of working on your own.
Yeah. Right.
So that you haven't left the school bench, so to say, and you're lost.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to oppose or contrast the Nerdrum Studio with the more we were speaking about the academic way of painting, and of course that comes with. It comes in the 17th century, where you have the French Academy, with Charles Le Brun leading this academy, and of course he has this.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, he has these recipes. You were talking about that when we were preparing. Tell us about
that. Yeah. Yeah, the list of 12 facial expressions that you would use in a painting, and it's quite funny because you can see the sheet of these different faces, and then you look at Le Brun's actual paintings, and they're actually there, taken out of this brochure of facial expressions.
Right.
Very strange. I don't know quite what to say about it, but I would say it's a little bit narrow with 12 expressions.
Okay.
Especially because great paintings try, of course, to display the catharsis of a story. And the catharsis of a story is much more complex than a simple face, now I'm afraid, or now I'm sad, or now I'm happy. The catharsis is a very complicated moment where the hero has not just been cleansed physically, but also in terms of his personal travel.
Yeah. And
then you need a double face.
Right.
So that very funny. It's almost art in a way, because it becomes a parody.
Right.
Of how to be sad and how to be angry.
But then I was thinking, when you mentioned that, I was thinking about something me and Martin Romberg were talking about. The difference between romanticism and music with really ground emotions, and your typical, speaking of self-portraits, your typical romantic self-portrait, which is more or less expressionless.
Oh my God.
And I was thinking then, well, if and this goes for a lot of painters today too. You know, the title has some long story to it, and then the face is just completely flat. So you could say that would be an improvement if they would have those 12 expressions generally in their work, right?
Yes. No. Well, I mean, that's because of beauty that they do that.
Beauty.
Yes.
How so? That
they make these empty expressions. Yeah, because beauty teaches. Beauty is a very. I mean, I love beautiful things. I buy antiquities, for example. I'm a great fan of beauty, and I think that Sir Roger Scruton is right when he says that we have lost beauty because we act like if it doesn't matter.
Right.
But beauty is a word with no postal address, so to say.
With no what?
Postal address.
Right.
I mean, there are two. So I'm not against beauty, but I'm against beauty as a sort of philosophy to fix our crisis.
Uh-huh.
And there are. I think there are two main arguments I have against that. One is historical. One is purely an analysis of the word, because you could make the case that an abstract painting can be beautiful.
Yeah.
What does beautiful mean? It means visually pleasing.
Yeah.
That's what it means. Nothing more than that.
Right.
So how can you say, for example, that the Da Vinci is more beautiful than a square of colors, dark colors?
Right.
How can you do that?
So there's no...
And I just want to finish. My second one is historical. My second opinion about beauty is that was the leading philosophy behind the creation of paintings and sculptures in the 19th century, early 19th century. Beauty.
Yeah.
And we know where it ended.
Yeah.
It ended with modernism.
So what is lacking in beauty then, as a term, as a foundation?
Well, it's a little bit like...
I mean, we're talking about the philosophical term, not just the adjective.
Yes, but it's a little bit like Lutheranism. You know, you could make the case that, because if you study history, as you know, polytheistic religions are often more rich culturally than monotheistic. And you could make the case that the Catholic Church was sort of polytheistic, with all its focus on the saints and the evangelistene.
Well, the disciples or the evangelists.
Yes. And then Lutheranism comes, and that is a sort of it's a one word that should describe, and it's one God and He's good. That's it. That's beauty.
Yeah.
It is something that is aesthetically pleasing. And then you have this people arguing over, oh, it's beauty, subjective is beauty, objective, and it's completely ridiculous conversation. The real question we should ask is beauty enough?
Right.
Because it's not enough.
I'm thinking about then that beauty, this which is comes from, which is an aesthetical term coming from, originating in the 18th century. Beauty has a strong element of being passive.
Passivity is a very good word for it, and I usually say if an Aristotelian and a Platonist are arguing, about the world of ideas and the world of reality or anything like that, the one can say I'm the one who's telling the truth, or the other one can say I'm the one telling the truth. Yeah. But I only have one thing to say about that: the Platonists are passive.
Yeah. Right.
Or the people who believes in genius. It's a passive belief.
Why?
It's not necessarily wrong, but it's passive. Yeah, because
tell us about genius then.
Yeah, because the idea of a pre-born talent doesn't encourage us to do something.
You're talking about now. This is also basically an 18th century term. Yeah. Genius with a big G, who's not doesn't need schooling or shouldn't have schooling at all. Because that would just drag down your
and that's the whole propaganda of this time. Every time there comes out a movie about a painter from history or anything like that, we've seen how he's a little bit special and he knows something the other one doesn't know. That is pre-born. And
right.
Yeah, it's the whole narrative.
And that's fundamentally different from. Well, speaking of the difference between the Nerdrum Studio and general, let's say, academic training then.
They believe in beauty because but they believe in just form and light and shape.
Right.
Because they are among in the beauty discussion, they are on the objective beauty line.
Right.
And the Nerdrum Studio and of course the Depressionists, as I like to call them, they are on the subjective beauty side. But the Nerdrum Studio is outside the beauty question. Because it's very easy to dismantle beauty. As we've seen in the history, you say, oh, beauty is the ideal. We have one God in aesthetics, that's beautiful. And of course, then a painter comes along, or actually multiple painters, and say, why not ugly?
Yeah.
Why is not that good enough?
Because
right?
it's one thing.
And then you get the modernism, you know,
Yeah.
with the ugliness, or it can be anything, right?
Yeah.
But then they forget that it's not beauty and it's not ugly that makes a piece great. It's the combination.
Right.
Right?
Well, this is
Why would you watch a movie where everything is beautiful?
Yeah.
You know, you see a boy running out of a cabin and he's so happy, and then 2 hours later he's still happy, he's fishing now. Why would you do that? So the point is not to make beautiful things or ugly things, the point is the combination.
Right. Right.
A beautiful boy who experiences ugly things. And of course then you have catharsis and all.
Right. And is it Aristotle who, I wonder where I read that. Speaking of what you're saying now, and I wanted to say some things about genius, but to sticking to beauty, because that's quite fundamental. The problem with the term. Was it him or was it Campbell point in any ways is that if you have a story where everything is, you know, the let's say the hero is really a superhero and can do anything, then you don't relate to him. It's completely remote. You cannot identify with it at all.
A very little, at least. It's a very difficult genre.
Yeah.
I mean, you have had movies which successfully have made the superhero genre, like the Yojimbo. That's a superhero genre, but you have to break him down at a certain point. But of course, a dude with a problem movie will always be stronger, in my opinion, because that is something we can relate to. A man who's pushed into something he doesn't really quite understand.
Right.
I want to pull it back to Luther here, because the one God, the one salvating God, that was the beginning of the end for Christianity. And the beauty and the term,
that should be the essence of Christianity.
And the term, as an institution, it was the beginning of the end. I'm not saying it contradicts the philosophy, but I'm saying it, and it's the same with beauty. That when beauty becomes the leading philosophy in aesthetics, that's the beginning of the end for beauty, ironically.
And what would you say then that what does beauty replace? What was before? What was before beauty?
I think that for a long time before they got beauty, they were a little bit confused themselves about what they were doing with the whole thing. At least the 1700s was, early 1700s, it's a very dark spot in painting history. But if we look back a little bit, at least we can see that you had the Calvinism in the Netherlands, 1500 and 1600 under Rembrandt, so there were no commissions from the church anymore. So you could say that the painting market changed already then. But luckily painting had such a status that private people ordered it.
Right.
And I mean, that hasn't happened today. That wouldn't happen today. It doesn't have that status. So why they come up with this term beauty is, I'm not sure if I've ever heard someone explain that very well. Why this beauty comes now. But I guess that it has something to do with that the Christendom is losing its grip. That you need to replace it. You need to make a sort of non-religious word for something which is good.
Right.
And then beauty comes.
So like the beauty of God or something like that?
Well, I mean, before that, most of the commissions in Europe would be to paint sceneries from the Bible.
Right.
Or at certain times of the Renaissance, paint from the Greek myths. But when there are no commissions anymore, when the whole Northern Europe has become Lutheran, I mean, you can see it in the churches in Scandinavia. They might be beautiful on the outside, but the insides are very white.
Right.
Very boring, very depressing.
There's a little funny story about that. In my hometown, the church was finished in the mid-1700s.
Yes.
Outside it's just brick, but then the guy who was in charge of it died. And so the guy who was running the mines, this was a mining silver mines, he took over. So on the inside, you have marble, wood painted like marble, sculptures, and ceiling painting, and of course very provincial, but still really quite beautiful. I mean, it's a Rococo church, provincial Rococo church. So
and what was the official? Shall we say the first one who died? Was he in any ways a more important figure than the second one?
Yeah.
That was what I was wondering.
Yeah, right. So when you don't get the experts, then you can get something real here. And okay, so this goes back to I have to remember this thing about genius, but I can't resist. This goes back to the whole idea of institutional schooling. Then the belief in, speaking of the church back home, speaking of experts. The choice of experts and what happens if you don't have experts. Shouldn't there be an expertless society in order for painting to really flourish again?
There should be many experts, I think.
I guess we're talking about different types of experts now.
Yes.
Because I'm talking about how this is so strange. This is at least one thing that happens in the 18th century, how the expert is no longer the man who knows the discipline, but the man who studies it theoretically and doesn't know how to execute a painting. I mean, in the Renaissance, again,
that is the era when the intellectuals are coming.
Yeah. Then I'm thinking about Edvard Munch. And you know the story also about the first director of the National Gallery in Norway.
Jens Thies.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Yes, that is, you could say, he's the ideal of an art historian, or whatever you want to call it, a painting intellectual or a collector. Yeah. Because he wanted to become a painter and a drawer himself. Yeah. And he was drawing together with Munch, and they were drawing a nude. And he saw when they were finished, Munch had this beautiful nude. He was such a master with form. I think he's one of the greatest when it comes to understanding of forms who has ever lived, actually. But Thies saw it and he looked at himself and he's decided, no, I will not become a painter. But so he had this love for painting. He gave it up and he loved it so much. And when he became the director of the National Museum, he got all the best Munch paintings.
Right.
And that is because he had a love for it. It's like the greatest conductors. The greatest classical conductors have been composers themselves. Right. But they had to conduct because they couldn't live out of composing, or they didn't feel like they could manage to compose what they were dreaming about. Like Furtwängler, for example, Wilhelm Furtwängler. Yeah. He was a composer. Or Bernstein. Yeah.
And you've been talking about several times lately about how this changed when you got, again, institutions teaching people to be directors.
Yes, when you have today's conductors who have gone to some sort of conducting school 3 or 4 years, and you expect them to conduct on the same levels as composers, forget it.
Right.
They don't have the love for it. But it's okay. At least they are following the notes. Right. They are just performers. It's even worse in the paintings with art historians. Because the art historians, they choose what is a good painting or not. Right. Because no matter if we like it or not, painting is in the domain of the art. Right. There is no other market for paintings today than the art market. Right. And so the art historians who have never painted, never wanted to paint, and who has this entire narrative that you of course know about, that history is not circled, history is a progression where each genius has pulled us a step forward, and they decide your fate as a painter, of course it crashes.
Yeah. So what then should be done with these institutions? Should they be shut down?
It depends on your strategy. It depends on whether you want to do you want to reform art, or do you want to bring up an alternative?
Right.
And kitsch is an alternative. It's an attempt to an alternative. And those two strategies are very different. I don't think there's one answer to this, but that's a very difficult question.
I'm thinking, well, there are several things. I'm thinking of one thing is the Canadian philosopher Jordan Peterson talking about that the universities, that the funding should be cut at least 20%, so they have to really focus on using that for the actual job that they should be performing. And your father has also suggested that there should be, this is a very concrete suggestion, that in the universities there should be two different fields. So will you
on the art
that?
history, on the art history subject, that there should be an Aristotelian and a Kantian.
Right. Explain that a bit more so people really understand what that is about.
Yes. Well, and that is one of the attempts to reform art, as I call it.
Okay.
Because then you go into the arts domain.
Yeah.
Because they get their education at the university, and you try to reform it.
Mm-hmm.
And that attempt is to, I mean, the major part of philosophy of art today is 18th century German idealism, as you know, and with Kant in the center, and wants to replace it. And Kant is a firm believer in beauty, so it has that whole fundament.
Right.
Tries to describe beauty and the genius as the creator of the beautiful. And Aristotle, of course, on the other hand, doesn't believe in genius. Quite frankly, doesn't believe in beauty either, I think. It's a quite alien term to him. He believes in recognition and storytelling.
Yeah.
And those two are the most polarized views of painting, sculpture, visual languages. So the idea is to implement that into art school education.
Right.
But it's an idea. I'm a little bit skeptical, because even though you were to make it in practice, I think it is so deep within people's minds that most people who would apply to the school would be Kantian already.
Right. And I guess there's the shall we say, danger that if you would have such a Aristotelian department, the same thing could happen that as with figurative departments in different art academies, they are just swallowed up and then just disappear.
Yeah. Well, and I mean it's quite understandable, because there is only the art market today. For painting. There is no other market available for you, except maybe as a decorateur. Maybe there is a market for that.
And so then what do you do concretely? If I understand you correctly, you don't think that is the path where you should devote your energy, trying to reform the institutions?
No, you have to do whatever you can, because we are in a very lousy situation.
Right.
But if we are talking about the future, let's say the future collectors, I would say that the most important thing you can teach collectors to do, we actually have a story there with Tretiakov in Russia. He was a very smart man, because he got Ilya Repin as an advisor.
Right.
Most art collectors today, they have an art history educated person to be their advisor.
Yeah.
And he, of course, has this entire ideology. Maybe he helps him with investing in things that will rise in price, but mostly I think it's ideology.
Right.
But Tretiakov had Ilya Repin, and that was a very smart suggestion. And that is the same message I would give to collectors today, that choose a painter as an advisor.
Yeah.
And except from that, buy what you want, because the painter can see whether it is of high quality or not, like formal things, or whether it is actually good painting. And that is the best assurement that it will still be of value in 200, 400 years.
Right.
It's actually the only thing we can hold on to. Is it well painted?
Right. Related to that, the problem of thinking, this is also sort of a passive way of behaving. The problem of thinking that the so-called arts or culture has to be supported. That it should not stand on its own as someone. I mean, if you go back to speaking of the 19th century, Dostoevsky having to write what do you call it, finish one chapter for the next deadline for this magazine that they had.
Yes.
He can just sit there and feel creativity or whatever. He had to work like hell and finish it.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's also the mental state, right? And I think that also refers to how your father thinks, that it's not about being supported, but about learning to work in a way that actually helps you when you're painting on your own.
Yeah, that's a slave mentality many people have.
Right.
That I need support,
Yeah.
That's a slave mentality. And of course the same people will criticize capitalism or criticize the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
Which really has nothing to do with the
What
problem.
would they criticize these things for?
No,
what's your point?
I've never really understood. It's a position of you're saying, oh, I'm in this situation because of the times.
Yeah.
And I need help. And you don't create a thriving culture that way by getting help. I mean, the classical culture will fall more and more and more down the more and more that it becomes something you need to save.
Right.
If you're saying we need the government to help this, you're saying that we need you to help us. And what do you spend government money on? You spend it on things that can't live on its own.
Right.
So you're initially saying that classical culture is of so little worth that it can't survive on its own. That's what you're saying.
Well, you're thinking about it as a museum object then.
Yeah.
So what about, so if we're talking about, there are different aspects of how the current situation can be improved. You've mentioned the collectors, quite concrete advice that whom they should trust as advisors to raise the level. And also open up the market. But then there's also the way generally that a figurative painter thinks about the whole situation. And also there's the aspect of when you're talking about collectors, I'm thinking about how the middle class or the bourgeoisie in the 19th century were educated people. They supported painters for their education and sort of felt what is described as a responsibility to support these things. But then I guess, you're back into supporting, painting or whatever.
Yes, it's not a good word, but as you mentioned with the bourgeoisie, and that is one place where people misunderstand. They think that popularity culture has taken over and you've probably heard that argument before. Yeah. And
that's actually the problem. That stands in our way.
Yes, American culture and all of that nonsense. But in reality, the popular culture has always been there. I mean, the commoners have always done their little strange things. But the actual problem is that the bourgeoisie haven't been able to keep their own culture intact.
Right.
They have sinking down to the level of the commoners.
What do you do then? How could you raise that level?
Well, that's a difficult question again, but how do you keep a class intact like that? Well, firstly, I mean, you've had many fiscal obstacles in the 20th century with the high taxes.
Yeah.
That has sort of pushed the bourgeoisie down and the noble down to its knees. So, and you had many old families who invested in painting and sculpture, which of course are all gone because they got this resistance, amongst other things. But there is another aspect to it, and that is that, and this goes back to the 1700s with beauty, is that we have lost an official mythology, and that is back to the beauty problem, that that painting should just be beautiful. That of course ends up with, yes, anything can be beautiful or anything can be of value.
Yeah.
But in the old days you had the mythology, you had the standard. It was in the everyday language.
Yeah.
Every day, no matter what argument you made a reference to some myth. Either it was in Europe with the Bible, it was Jonas and the whale one day, or it was Mary from Bethania the other day, where Jesus very amusingly say to his disciples, "The poor will always be here, but I'm going to die in a few days." So it was in the everyday language. It was superstructure. It was part of the, should I say, it was part of the society's infrastructure.
Right.
He's the only painter today who I think has made something that could become a beacon, a sort of direction for painters.
Right.
He's the only one. I don't think even Andrew White did it. Andrew White was a very good painter, but to build upon him, no, I don't think so.
He is a strange sort of hybrid, because you could perhaps describe him as a naturalist, but still he manages to imbue, seemingly everyday scenes with some kind of drama or some kind of story, even though but of course it is absolutely not Baroque in any sense of the term.
I would say that the good thing about religion historically has been that it has been an attempt to describe something universal.
Yeah.
Both Christendom, Judaism, and the Norse myths, the Greek myths, they have tried to describe something universal, something timeless.
Right.
They haven't always succeeded, but that is what Odd is building upon. So you could say that Odd is a religious painter.
In that sense, in the sense of going to the core of
very important things.
Right.
That are always important.
Right. So coming back to this idea of copying your father then, or trying to copy. This is also a favorite criticism of his students, that they are all like him. Of course, if they would be, that would be a world historically exceptional.
Well, it used to be the same criticism against the blacks, that they were all stupid.
Yeah.
They were all the same.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about something I said to a journalist once. Well, it's not difficult to be original compared to Öde Nerdrum. You just paint worse pictures than he does.
Yeah.
And I don't think people think about that generally, how extremely difficult it is to be completely unoriginal. I mean...
well, it's impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah. But to get to the point where you're so unoriginal that it becomes good, it's very difficult, but not impossible.
Right.
Yeah. But of course, the journalist didn't. You don't expect that the journalist understood you, right?
No.
No.
Well, the quote didn't make it to the newspaper, so obviously there was something there.
Okay. Yes, but it's most people know very little about art, but the whole narrative is glued into their head from very early age.
Right.
I remember in children's school, it was a assignment to write about why Picasso is a great artist. That was the assignment.
Right.
And that was the time when I thought that Leonardo and Caravaggio were artists.
Yeah.
Actually, even though my father had coined the kitsch term many years earlier. But so I refused to do the assignment because I thought it was too loaded.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. That must have been after the incident where you and your brother come to your father with postcards of Matisse, I think it was, and you wanted the postcards.
Yes, because it reminded us of our drawings. We were 4 or 5 years old.
Hey, you and your brother were thoroughly educated in judging quality in painting from very early on. You have to tell that story.
What story?
Your father would ask you which
painting was better, 1 versus 1, and we would win a small coin every time we got it right.
Right.
Yeah, so we were educated, but it was the familiarity to Matisse. So, and that's what art is. That's what art is. Infantilization of culture. Yeah. That's what it is. Yeah. So and of course, art has no. It is very anti-elitistic.
Art.
Yes.
How?
On objectively, it's very anti-elitistic.
What do you mean by that?
You create a system where none is best. It's a sort of a lottery.
Okay, in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's. I tend to think that democracy might be a good idea in politics, but not in in painting.
Yes, I'm not quite sure about the prior either.
Oh, okay.
Yes, because you, as you know, I mean, democracy hasn't proved to create many great paintings.
Right.
So.
Right. There's one thing I remember you have been talking about, and so we're sort of all the time circling around the concept of, well, the Nerdrum Studio, the Renaissance workshop tradition, that's the personal relation to the teacher or the master, and then the official institution. You know, the initial academy, French academy, was founded in 1648, but at least from the 1660s, early then on, it becomes, actually it was founded out of some sort of a quarrel between the Painters Guild and the painters favored by the king. So it was given to the painters favored by the king as a privilege, as a status, in terms of status. Yes. And of course, it allowed the state regime to clearly educate the painters in how they should make propaganda for the state. So obviously that's a big problem of the schools. Yes, that's why I was asking you: should one? Well, I don't know if you should, how you should actually go about bringing the institutions down, or at least just let them crumble. Should that be an alternative?
To let the schools crumble? Yes, well, that might be an idea. Well, anything that can get rid of the school, I'm in favor of, quite frankly. Actually, the whole university is quite interesting. The whole creation of the university, which began in the 11th, 12th century. I think it's the Bologna University, which is recognized as the first university.
Right, in the 11th century.
And it's interesting because first, the Catholic Church makes knowledge more or less illegal when the Christian takes over Europe. It becomes illegal to manufacture toilets and all sorts of nonsense. Yes.
What?
Yeah. Yes. I don't have the specifics for this, but they forgot to make toilets because it became so awkward and so socially wrong to use toilets.
No shit.
Yes, that's the end of the toilet. So and then you've had many hundred years of what we call the Dark Ages, and when the university opens again, it grows out of the same institution that destroyed the knowledge of the Roman Empire,
right?
The church. And so you have the university starts up with a doctor's degree, a bachelor's degree, And that is very typical concerning that it has grown up from the church.
Yeah.
That you have immediately this thing that the faith comes in, or that the hierarchy of that this one is a believer, this one is not, comes in a strange way. That this one has a doctorate degree, this one doesn't. This one has a bachelor's, this doesn't. And that is completely different from the ancient Academy of Plato or Lyceum by Aristotle.
Yeah.
There was never any talk about any degrees.
Right.
And it's the same for the situation of painting in the Renaissance. There was no degrees among painters.
Right.
In that sense.
Yeah.
You came, you studied with a master, and you worked alongside him, you painted on his paintings, and eventually you could stand on your own feet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you could get so many strange people like Filippo Lippi, for example, that you could never get if painting as a profession had grown out of the church.
Right. And then there's also the difference between believing in experts, I mean, where the theoreticians are experts, and the ability to see the quality in the work of someone who does not have his papers in order.
Yes, and that is actually which is so fantastic with the Medici. Because and the Medici is a family that fascinates people, and that is very understandable, because what they did, for example, with Brunelleschi, here you have a guy who's not part of any architectural guild, and Cosimo Medici sees him and understands that this man is quite smart, and that's fantastic. When a person is able to see that the person doesn't belong to any institutions.
Right.
No one likes him, especially. You can see that he's clever. That takes a brilliant mind.
Right.
And he goes to Rome, studies the Pantheon, and he comes back and he finds the solution. And then famously it was that they wouldn't give the answer to him before he showed it to them. And he said, and he had to trick them. So he said, "Will you give the assignment to me if I can make an egg stand?" And they tried with an egg themselves. No, this doesn't work. Okay, you'll get the assignment if you can get an egg to stand. And then he took an egg and he crushed it. In the bottom, you see? Yeah. Here it stands. And they said, "You have cheated us. That's too obvious." And then he says, "Well, it's going to be obvious with the Duomo also."
Right.
And he did it. Yeah. But actually during the construction of it, the Medici Cosimo was put into prison and he was exiled. And Brunelleschi lost his work because he was not member of the architectural guild.
Right.
When the other guys took over, Albizzi.
Right. I'm thinking also of Pericles of ancient Athens. There's one quote which is so fantastic, where he talks about, from that quote at least, you get an idea of Athens as sort of the American dream. Mm. You know, a person can come here from low stature, but if he is knowledgeable, he can rise up to a very high position.
Yeah.
So it's judged on being able to see the individual talent. And this, I think, my favorite story about this, because it's so obvious, it shows it's so obvious, is the idea of what happened to Ilya Repin. Even though he was not of noble descent, he could rise up and be,
and he said it himself. He was so grateful that he was a painter and that painters could rise if they were clever.
Yeah.
Because it was not like that in the military at the time.
Right.
Of course, today, now, the military is one of the few places where it is like that.
Yeah.
Where you can really grow.
Yeah.
I mean, all the generals have started as a private.
Right. So it changes with the disciplines. Yeah.
At least it has changed with painting, because painting has lost all its structure. Mm. It has become a hostage to art.
Mm. Yeah. And then you have the whole idea of how society, or how consensus today views this. Because undeniably, and I talked to Per Lundgren about this, undeniably there is quite a bit of social pressure already when you're a figurative painter, because then you're old-fashioned and that's not in vogue. But especially if you are somehow related, connected to your father as a student or someone inspired by his work.
Yes. A famous line is, I've heard it from students, that they are told by people they know at home that it's good that you study with Nerdrum, but don't eat everything if it's you.
Right.
And that of course means don't eat anything if it's you.
Right.
And then
what's your answer to that?
Well, I like the students who are open about it and tells me about it, because then we can talk about it.
Right.
It's better than those who don't say anything.
Right.
Well, my answer to that is, of course, my question is, why do they say that? And why do they not say that when you go to the university? It's good that you go to the university, but don't eat everything they feed you. You'll never hear that if you go to the university.
Right. Is this connected with this respect for authority? I mean, when you have your papers in order, you know,
it's the same as Brunelleschi, that you have this figure who's outside of the establishment and he is a master. And that offends them deeply. Right. Yeah. That it is possible. Of course, it's always the case that they come from the outside. Oh.
Do you think the kitsch term somehow can make people more, what's the word? Can make them resist this social pressure?
Definitely.
Better. How so?
Because they learn that they don't have to artify pieces.
Right.
It's not so easy for everyone to know that.
Yeah. So if you are released from your anxiety to follow the art rules, then you are free to release that energy into actual creating good work.
Yes, definitely. But I also think that the problem is that a lot of people who go into painting today have that, are people, to put it in another way, I think that there are a lot of potential painters today who don't become painters.
Right.
Because it's so alien for them, the whole narrative, the whole belief system in painting, that you should show your own feelings, or you should express yourself, and at the same time you should be a representative of your time. All those things, probably a lot of potential painters don't become painters because of that scenery. Like people who become movie makers, for example, they are not interested in expressing themselves.
Right. No.
So maybe a lot of movie makers could be potential painters.
Given the premise that the storytelling is the most important thing.
Yes.
Right. But connected with this is the attitude, should you say, among so-called conservative critics. People who are supposedly stand for so-called traditional values. But I find that they very often spend a lot of time doing PR for the things that they apparently don't like.
Yes, that's the whole... that is how conservative critics express themselves today.
Yeah.
In general. The modernists, or whatever you want to call them, the establishment, they do something and then the conservative critics react to it. Right. That's the whole system. And no matter if you like Jordan Peterson, for example, or not, it's a fact that his entire oeuvre has been built upon reactions to the society, not by coming with any of his own thoughts.
Well, the cleaning your room thing.
Well, he has done that as well, but his whole fame has become as a
reacting
reaction
to those laws. Yeah, right,
yes,
right.
Which means that they are always one step ahead.
Yeah.
It's like a chess game.
Okay.
And you don't win a chess game if you always respond to the other opponent's moves. You win if you make your own attacks.
So there's a strange connection here between the idea of beauty, where you're creating passive pictures and your state of mind being passive.
Yes, there is a strange connection. Yeah.
And I'm thinking about the problem I have with these so-called conservative critics. They have valid points as well, but the problem is all the what's the word? They like too much to talk about how bad the situation is. They don't see or don't say, look at those people making these paintings here. Look at that composer there. Look at these writers here.
Exactly.
So they don't lift it up. And so you get this self-fulfilling prophecy that also is based on thinking like the art consensus tells you to think.
Exactly. And Odd is one of the only ones that has had a very clear vision of what he wants.
Yeah.
And that is very rare to see in the classical figurative world.
Yeah.
They will only say, oh, we should be allowed to do this and that, and they don't have a clear alternative to what painting should be.
No.
It's only, well, there's some portraits.
Well, isn't there a problem generally with classical figurative painters waiting again passively for anointment? It's not. It seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me that oftentimes they are not really concerned with changing the structure, but just to be accepted by the structure. You see the same phenomenon in typical late 19th century, with the radical realists coming in that just paint raw reality, and that's so brave. And from the first minute they make their own exhibitions, but that's because they are not accepted in the royal state exhibitions.
Yes.
So what they want is not to create something else and this is just shit. They want acceptance from that which they supposedly revolt against. Yeah. In Norway, second year of this so-called reaction exhibition, the fall exhibition, second year they are on state sponsorship. So, and I think this is you're talking about the whole idea of the foundational philosophical principles of morale, what you accept and what you do not accept. How do you accept to be treated? And what do you think is your right? Yeah.
Well, to quote Machiavelli, not directly anyways, but Machiavelli says that to be a prince, and who is the prince? It's of course yourself. At least that's how you can use the book, by always changing out the word prince to oneself. He says that the prince of course has to be cruel to keep his power, but he mustn't forget why he's prince in the first place.
Right.
He's prince to do something that he thinks it's good. Yeah. Otherwise, you can just change him out with a new despot. Yeah. So when a painter purposely makes bad work to fit into the art system, he's even worse than one of the brutal princes Machiavelli described.
Yeah.
He's completely amoralic.
Right. I remember once you were talking about how a figurative painter often would act going into a gallery.
Yes, and that is a big problem. This goes way back to our historical talk about the destruction of superstructures. Because what happened, for example, it was actually my father asked an Italian about this, and his answer was very interesting. He asked him how could sculpture and painting vanish so fast in the Dark Ages. And he said the first thing that happened, this was around the time of Constantine and all of that, was that all the places, you could say the room for showing your works disappeared.
Right.
Now, I don't know what that meant in detail, but I can only juxtapose it with our time.
Right.
Where do you display your paintings today? Well, there's one place which has a monopoly, and that's the galleries. But the galleries are always also a place where you show art.
Right.
Where do you show classical works? Where do you do that? There's no place. And then people can say the museum, but the museum is not a living space.
Right.
It is a place where you collect things that you consider to be finished and over with. So the only thing we have are the galleries. Well, some people would say we have the internet now, but I'm skeptical because you are competing with so much nonsense on the internet.
Right.
But the only thing you have is the gallery, and they are so eager to get somewhere, to show their work somewhere.
So what is the fault that they do when they go into a gallery? To be really specific about
one
this.
fault is that they are way too eager to get in somewhere. So they accept ridiculous agreements about the commission, where the gallery takes 50% of the money, for example.
Right.
I mean, it's ludicrous. There's a story about Bruno Liljefors, the Swedish painter, in the beginning of the 20th century, and he was very annoyed because now the galleries took 2% or something. So the times have very changed.
Right. Do you see any remedy for that? I mean, the gallery part.
I think that the Renaissance, what happened in the Renaissance was that the painters were never simply painters. There were many things. Michelangelo was an architect, a sculptor, painter.
Right.
He was even an interior designer.
Yeah.
So I think the one answer is for painters to learn to stand on more legs.
Yeah.
Because painting is not something that is protected by anyone now. And one time in the Middle Ages it was the same conditions.
Right. So when it comes to understanding the current situation, typical arguments are the thing about how popular culture has destroyed or is in the way, or capitalism is in the way. Only judging things from on a superficial level. What's your reaction to that? The problem of capitalism.
I mean, if you were to make that claim, you would have to have historical facts supporting that claim. And
why?
Why? Well, I understand that. I mean, very many young socialists will just swallow that claim immediately because it's part of their agenda. But if you look at history, I mean, capitalism, you could make the case that because under the Calvinism in Holland, Rembrandt was there, and the churches did not commission any paintings anymore.
Right.
You could make the case that it was the capitalism that saved painting in Amsterdam, because Amsterdam was a trading city. Very much, actually very many Danish people were in Netherlands. They were traveling up and down with timber all the time.
Yeah.
So almost all the old houses in Amsterdam have oak floors from Norway.
Right.
So, and then you got all these merchants who ordered paintings.
Right.
So you could say that capitalism saved painting rather than destroyed it. And actually, Rembrandt, he was a collector himself. He was actually addicted to it. So
right.
he had the problem there. Even on the day his house was forcibly sold, he was bidding on this portrait painting at the auction house. Then he was completely bankrupt. So he had the problem.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And of course, there's also the problem with not having a name, socially speaking. One of my favorite painters, of course, is Georges Latour, French painter, 17th century. And they say about him that perhaps 1/3 of his work is lost because he didn't have a name. Yeah. And of course that means the paintings were not valuable, seen as valuable. So obviously if you see a painting as a very expensive commodity, you will want to take care of it.
Yes, but there is another side to this. And that is, what about the 2/3 that were saved? And this goes for Rembrandt too. Because Rembrandt was completely unknown for at least 200 years. Vermeer too.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking about the Academy and the Saloon in Paris, I mean, none of those guys had any idea of who Vermeer was or Caravaggio. Maybe one or two of them had heard about Rembrandt. They had, but who cares about them? And then comes this guy Manet, who's a sort of makes a revolt, and he wants to paint like Velázquez.
Right.
No one at the Academy wants to paint like Velázquez.
Right.
So, and then is the question: who took care of Rembrandt? Who took care of Georges Latour? That was, well, actually, I know partly who took care about Rembrandt. There was actually a lot of Germans, some strange noblemen who got it, and well, this was strange, this was interesting. And actually, most of the painting names, the titles of Rembrandt's paintings are created by these strange collectors who didn't know what the paintings were about. Bathing Woman and the Jewish Bride and Night Guard. That has nothing to do with actually the Night Guard's real title would be probably the Amsterdam Militia.
Right.
So all the answers are in the names of how forgotten Rembrandt was.
Right.
But after all, I'm quite an optimist also in this era, because after all, 2/3 of Georges Latour's paintings were preserved by someone.
Right.
Just like the Medici saw that Brunelleschi was a talented man, even if he was outside the guild, there are, and there have been, and there will be some people who see, and they will save the world. What is funny about that?
Because it's true.
Yes. I was expecting a tear.
Yeah.
But the laughter is as well.
Well, isn't that the Buddha technique? You laugh when it comes to the end.
I don't know.
Okay. I think we should just cut there.
Yeah.
No, just save the world. I was thinking you were starting to get into Jesus or something like that. So I was like, but actually, you know, Jesus is perhaps not the guy to save painting.
No.
No. Do you think Muhammad could save painting?
No. I think that strange, eccentric noblemen save paintings.
Right.
Not prophets. The prophets have a way too big ego.
So you need prophet and not prophets.
Yes, that's right. That's the punchline.
Öde Nerdrum, thank you for coming to the cave of
Thank
Apelles.
you.